Well, so I am Ryan Kraudel with a company called Valencell. Anybody ever heard of Valencell? A few? Okay, that's good. So for those of you who have not heard of the company, we make the biometric sensor technology that goes into wearable devices of all kinds. So specifically, it's the PPG sensors that shine light into the body and measure how much of that light's reflected back based on blood flow. The easy way to think about it is the green blinking lights on the back of a smartwatch or a fitness band. That is likely our technology in some form or fashion. So our stuff's been embedded into close to 46 different devices that are on the market now, and we've been involved in close to 100 different wearable product development cycles. So we don't make the wearables themselves. We focus specifically on the PPG sensor technology, and we provide that technology to the device makers and help them integrate that technology into whatever device they're building, whether that's a smartwatch or a fitness band, or a lot of what we'll talk about today is in the ear, in either earbuds or hearing aids or other ear-based devices. So one quick thing, I like to keep these as interactive as possible, so please do interrupt with questions or anything you want me to dive deeper on. I don't want this to be a one-way monologue, so please let's have a dialogue as we go along. And so I only have 86 slides. How much time do we have? No, I'm just kidding. Just a few to kind of frame the discussion here. So Valencell's been around since 2006 officially. So long before the word wearables existed, let alone the whole market. And what we have seen over that time is this move towards what is now a second phase of growth in wearables. But the first phase was really all about activity tracking in some form or fashion, telling you how many steps you took, how many calories you burned, in general, how active were you in a given day. Think of the original Fitbits as the kind of the prototype of these devices. And while that's somewhat useful, that the novelty wears off pretty quickly, and the usefulness of that information is fairly limited. Whereas now what we're seeing is this next phase of wearables growth that is really focused on understanding more about how an individual is responding to whatever they're doing at the time, whether that's sitting on the couch or running a marathon or managing a disease or any number of things that we do on a daily basis. And really this is focused on getting deeper insights at an individual level, but also at a population level, and aggregating all of this data and doing analytics and assessments at a population level that can then be utilized at an individual level to do compare and contrast and trending and a variety of different other assessments and analytics off of that. And what I think will be more of a long-term, probably a third wave of growth around the wearables market is shifting into predictive analytics and really looking at how we shift the nature of healthcare delivery from episodic, periodic, point-in-time measurements to continuous monitoring, continuous measurement to get a baseline for an individual, and then accessing healthcare and healthcare services when there's a deviation from that baseline. And that is a very long process to get there. There's a lot of things that have to change, obviously, in the healthcare system and how healthcare is delivered. But this small segment of the market is showing the way in how we can get there in identifying how an individual's body is responding to whatever they're putting it through, and how those trends are changing over time. And this is really what you see at a macro level, this convergence of consumer wearables and health and medical devices. You look at any of the recent announcements and product strategies on the consumer side from Apple, Fitbit, Garmin, Samsung, you name it, they're all moving towards becoming personal health devices at a minimum, if not outright medical devices in some cases. And that has certainly gotten the attention of the medical device community. Trying not to get in the way. Didn't realize I was in the way of the slides. I'll step over. That has certainly gotten the attention of the medical device community in this whole notion around patient-generated health data, most of which is coming today from wearable devices, but also connected health and home health devices that are increasingly feeding into that trend as well. So you're seeing a lot of traditional medical device companies now designing devices that are intended to be worn outside of a medical facility and feeding that data into a patient treatment protocol or workflow of some kind, or EMR. Yes, sir.
So is the mashup of consumer and medical devices still too rich to attract Chinese players?
No, sorry, this was not intended to be a comprehensive list of all the players in each one of these buckets. This was just a representative sample.
Okay.
Yes, there are certainly Chinese companies who are extremely actively involved on both sides of this equation. Yes?
So I'm sort of fixated on the statement in the black at the bottom, the accurate data. You know, I've gotten into discussions in the past with folks, say, from Quantified Self, where they're a big tracking community.
Yeah.
And sort of the notion there is that, at least on the consumer side, more for predictive analytics and maybe for forecasting the need to escalate an issue, that reproducibility may be more important, may trump accuracy in terms of a critical metric for performance. Do you guys have a position on that?
So it depends on what you're trying to measure and what you're trying to do with that data. So you need to meet a certain accuracy threshold to have relevance, but in general we agree trending off of a baseline can be more important at an individual level than the specificity of the device itself. Now, we think that the more accurate the better, obviously, but trending is certainly an important element to how these devices can add value. Good questions. Any others? Okay. So the interesting thing is, back to this point around the accuracy of the data, some of the assessments that have been used recently in consumer wearables, and I know this is a bit of an eye chart, so I'm not intending to cover all of this. So I'm happy to share these slides with anyone afterwards if you're interested. What's interesting is some of the assessments that are currently being used in consumer wearable devices. There are certainly aspects of value there from a fitness and a wellness standpoint, but there's also value there from health and medical claims as well. And so I'll just pick out one here. Heart rate variability is a very popular one right now. Heart rate variability is measuring the time between beats of the heart. And you might think if your heart's beating at 60 beats a minute, it beats like a metronome. That's not a good sign. The more regular the time between beats of the heart, the worse a sign that is. You want variability and we're talking milliseconds of variability, but you want variability in terms of the time between beats of your heart, because it's a sign that your body is ready to respond actively to stimuli of whatever kind. And so the higher your heart rate variability, the more healthy your heart and the more ready you are to respond. Now, that for most consumer wearables on the market, particularly in the sports and fitness realm, heart rate variability is used primarily for overtraining or undertraining indications. There's also it's also used in sleep analysis for the wearables that are on the market. That some of them use HRV as an input to sleep analysis. But of course, heart rate variability is also being used for the atrial fibrillation and other arrhythmia detection, and there's numerous clinical studies that, that showcase how heart rate variability can show indications of AFib and arrhythmia. And what's compelling here, and this speaks to the overall trend, is most of the clinical research that has been done related to biometrics in the health and medical, at least in terms of health and medical claims, have been done with ECG. But now that you're seeing other sensor modalities catching up to ECG that can be easier embedded into a wearable device, you're starting to see the ability to use this same research and the assessments and analytics that have been proven out via ECG now are relevant and applicable with PPG sensors and other sensor modalities for different assessments and analytics with biometric data. Yes?
What's VO2?
VO2 is a way to measure the oxygen consumption, the maximum oxygen consumption that your body can utilize in a given time frame. It's a proxy for cardiovascular fitness. Yes.
When you say this data has been proven and validated, how do you validate, for example, heart rate variability?
Well, so it depends on what device you're trying to validate for the heart rate variability, but most of the devices use an ECG as a benchmark device and then compare the results from the wearable device to the ECG, certainly as it relates to these assessments. Yes?
So does that mean if it's a consumer device that's measuring this very precisely, like the hospital codes or insurance codes will actually accept this as an indicator and allow?
No, so that requires that requires the device itself to be cleared by a regulatory body, in this case the FDA, and specifically cleared for the claims that the device is making. So if a device is claiming to identify atrial fibrillation, then that device itself needs to be an FDA, at least for the purposes of utilizing that in a health and medical use case, and certainly for payers to pay for it. Does that answer your question?
To also answer your question, a certain amount of medical devices are prescribed by the physician. And so if it's prescribed by the physician, then there is coverage for it. So especially something like atrial fibrillation, a patient may wear it for 2 weeks, and it's feeding information. But as you said, it has to be declared. It has to be cleared by the FDA, but it is also prescribed. So it's not just something they would get off the shelf.
What about the other way around? I have my own device that I bought on the Apple Watch, right? And they told me, hey, you might be sick with your doctor. Can they use that information, or can they?
That's purely elective.
Mm-hmm. Completely up to the provider as to whether or not they use it. And there's big debates going on right now about wearable data, people coming to their healthcare providers with wearable data, and some providers want to see that information, but others don't want to be liable for making decisions based off of data that is coming from a device that is not cleared by the FDA or other regulatory bodies.
It's primarily the liability against it's wrong. And the
Yes.
argument against.
Yeah, because ultimately the provider is responsible for the care they're giving. Yes?
So just to follow up on that question, so are you saying that all of these remote sensors for these biometrics are technologically medical grade, so they're the same as in hospital? However, legislatively is the only difference where?
No, there's wide variability in terms of the accuracy of the sensor technology that's going into consumer wearables, certainly. So not all of them are equivalent to medical grade technology. What I was saying is there are some technologies out there that are equivalent to medical grade technology that are coming to market now.
I see, so some subset of this is medical grade.
In terms of these assessments, there's consumer grade technology that can meet the levels of accuracy required for medical claims. Whether or not the device has gone through the clearance process or not that's a pretty broad spectrum, and it's all over the map. Yes?
So there are two parts to this, right? One is the sensor itself. Then like there is the software which measures what sensor is outputting. So is there any standard which like pins down like whatever? Like for example, if you sell the same sensor to multiple providers, like, then is there any standard?
So it really comes back to the claims the device is making. So there are, but a short answer is no, there aren't standards per se. Some of that depends on what the device is intended to do and the claims the device is making. But in most cases, it is up to the FDA as to whether or not the device meets that standard or meets the criteria required for that device and the claims that it's making. Yes?
Ryan, I thought I might have heard something different in that question, or stimulated in my mind. Does Valencell deliver not only the sensors, but also the analytics software that understands and delivers these types of outputs, or do your customers do their own value add on the analysis of the signals?
So happy to answer that as well. So we, Valencell, make the sensor technology as well as the firmware and the algorithms that process the raw data coming off of the sensor. That processing of the data, both the signal processing and the post-processing of that data, can serve as inputs to these assessments.
Right.
In some cases, and in a handful of these, we have sample code that give our customers, the device makers, head start in getting to what we would consider a production level user experience around these types of assessments. But it's not production ready.
They do more.
Our customers, the device makers, do more with the data that our sensors provide.
And excuse me, are you going to talk about blood pressure as well? Is that off the chart?
I had not. I don't have anything prepared around blood pressure, but I'm happy to talk about that if that's of interest.
Super interested in that. Yeah.
Okay.
And can you say something about the range of body types, metabolisms, et cetera, that are supported, or do you restrict it to a kind of a narrow range of physical types?
If I understand the question, in terms of how the sensor technology works, or
can it be used for a child? Can it be used for a really short person, a really tall person, a handicapped person?
Got it. So, and I'll speak to what we do at Valencell specifically. This doesn't necessarily apply to all biometric sensor technology companies, but we go out of our way to test the specific implementation of our technology. We have about a third of our headquarters looks like a gym and a test lab, and we've got a pool of about 100 volunteers who come through there on a weekly basis, because it is important. This is not like a piece of software that you run on a PC or a server. It's not going to perform the same on me as it does on you or you. Or because it has to interact with the human body and human tissue, all humans are different, right? So we've designed the technology to work on as much of the population as possible, all different shapes, sizes, skin tones, fitness levels, you name it. But it's not perfect, and there are some cases and some people that the technology just does not work on. But that you can say that about any sensor technology that is measuring the function of the human body. Nothing's perfect when it comes to measuring human functions. I will say we also, so in addition to testing in our own labs, we work with a variety of different third-party test labs as well to make sure that they're able to replicate the results we're seeing in our lab in independent labs. And that's outside of the regulatory process. We do that as a standard part of our process.
Is it just in the US or a little bit more worldwide?
We work with customers globally. In fact, most of our customers are outside the US.
You mentioned that there are like 40 devices on the market.
Mhm.
Is it all just like customer wearables, or do you have some medical grade that you went through the certification process to make sure that the FDA said, yeah, that's okay?
So we're in the process of supporting several of our customers right now through the 510K process. I can't speak to who exactly those are, but not surprisingly, the med devices take a lot longer to get to market, and not just from a regulatory standpoint, but just from a product development standpoint as well. So we're working with a variety of different med device companies now, a handful of which are going through the regulatory process. And that's, as a sensor technology company, we can't lead that process. We don't go through the clearance process ourselves. It's the end device and the end device maker who has to lead that process. We, of course, support them in that process in terms of our manufacturing processes and documentation of how we do the software and all of those elements of what we do that feed into the regulatory clearance process. But our customers are the ones that lead that.
So how does a care provider integrate the device? The wearable, the result into
The data into.
Yeah.
So that's also highly variable. It depends on the healthcare system and the data in question and what end result or what disease state that data is intended to address.
Yeah, but there are so many wearable devices. How do they accept? This device reject another one.
This kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier. It's really down to the individual healthcare provider and how they use that data today. But there's some devices that data is fed directly into an electronic health record. But most of those devices are things like connected glucose monitors or connected blood pressure cuffs or other home health devices.
Just an anecdote on this topic specifically, where they intersect, because my personal experience has been that my general practitioner physician appreciates having quantitative data rather than qualitative impressions, right? So when I go in for my annual, if he and I want to, and it goes back, that's optional, not all would be as open-minded, but I think people can select a physician who will respect that you're giving them at least trend information that is more useful than just your impression. And I think that's where change starts.
Yeah, so absolutely. I know I personally wouldn't go see a provider who's not willing to accept
Exactly.
that kind of data, but I'm just a little bit biased. So any other questions on any of this? And by the way, I did not mean to indicate that these are the only assessments or the only data that our sensors or other biometric sensors
Would
measure.
you talk about blood pressure for a minute or two?
Sure. Let me get to that in 2 slides. It'll provide some more context to it. But there are some interesting examples of consumer and medical wearables today that are certainly go way beyond what you think of in terms of traditional wearables. So blood pressure, cuffless blood pressure, there's a lot of work going on around that. I'll talk about that in just a moment. We've got customers who are doing a lot of interesting things in pain management with wearable devices. In this case, this is a sleep mask. In the case above that, that's a VR headset that is using real-time biometrics as part of the virtual experience that is literally taking people's mind off the pain and showing amazing results on the order of 50 to 60% pain reduction while they have the device on, and even hours afterwards still showing 20 to 30% pain reduction, which with the opioid crisis in this country in particular, that has real potential to change people's lives. This one is an interesting one that's a company called GoGo Band. It's a startup in Virginia, actually, that is, so anyone know what enuresis is? No, I didn't either until.
I just looked it up.
Okay. It is children's bedwetting. So they put this device around, so they figured out using heart rate and heart rate variability and activity data or motion data that they can predict before a child is about to wet the bed, and they can wake the kid up and instruct them to go to the restroom and come back to a dry bed instead of everything else that's on the market today is essentially a moisture sensor, which is after the fact.
Still got to change the sheets.
Yeah, exactly. And they think there's around 100 million kids around the world that have that problem, at least for some portion of their lives. And of course, if you're a parent with a kid with that problem, you'll do whatever it takes to make that problem go away. So that's another interesting one that we never would have thought of as a sensor technology company as an application for a wearable device to be able to address a problem like that.
Is that valid also at the other end of the age spectrum?
So they are in the process of testing that on seniors.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
This question over there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think he basically asked the same question.
Yeah. So they don't have enough data at this point to know for sure, but testing's ongoing. And then obviously remote patient monitoring is a big area. Wearable research platforms. Wearables have now been used I looked this up a few months ago in clinicalresearch.gov. Close to 1,500 different clinical trials have now used wearable devices. About 450 or so are currently active, either recruiting participants or actively doing research on those participants now. So, and that's growing rapidly.
Would those be trials where the biosensor was the thing being tested, or was it just part of what was monitoring some other therapy?
Part of something monitoring and providing contextual information around a pharmacotherapy primarily.
So
Yeah, I worked on cancer studies, and they're starting to use them for long-term care, because after
Yeah.
they finish chemo, you want to make sure that
Yep.
they follow through for months.
Yeah, that's, so some of it's in the initial validation and research around the getting the pharmacotherapy approved, but then also after that in collecting real-world evidence around once that therapy is approved and how that, once it gets to a much broader population, how people respond to that pharmacotherapy at scale.
So, I had a question to follow up on that one. So, that device itself should be FDA approved in order to make sure that the clinical study they're doing.
The research platforms? Yeah, most of those are. But again, it depends on how the data is being used. In some cases, and actually in a lot of the cases where wearables are being used now, a lot of those are consumer non-cleared devices. But that's providing contextual information that helps them identify how the individual's responding to that pharmacotherapy, but it is not associated with a claim around that therapy. So, part of the challenge there is in finding a cleared device. You need the device to be cleared specifically for what you are measuring and the way you are using that particular measurement. And so aligning those two things along with a pharmaceutical that's going through the clearance process, most of those pharma companies are obviously spending billions of dollars on these trials, and they don't want anything to get in the way of an approval around those, and you can speak to this a lot better than I can, I bet.
What's happening is the patients that were wearing the wearables, they stuck with the study. Other patients who felt, hey, I'm well enough, you know, they're gonna go see their grandkids in faraway places, they don't come back, and you lost follow-up. So this is one way to keep the patients and the caregivers interested, and we have to track these patients for 5 years, and people don't stay in one place.
Yeah. In fact, we just had a conversation with a research institution that is kicking off a neurological study that they're structuring it in the same way that the Framingham Heart Health Study was structured 40 years ago, and so they have plans to monitor people for 40 years, and they want to start today with wearable devices, among other things. So again, not a comprehensive list by any means, just highlighting a few that you may not have heard of before. That oh yeah.
Are there specific use cases for the military and first responders that involve monitoring the patient versus the worker or the employee?
Not sure I follow
So
the
what kind of use
patient.
cases you were mentioning military first responders? Are you monitoring the employees
Yeah.
or the patients?
So
Some
in
countries
this
that the
particular
US
case,
is not
this.
allowed to monitor employees.
Right. So in this particular case, this is embedding biometric sensors into the radio earbuds for military personnel and first responders in the field to do real-time vital sign monitoring.
Okay.
We don't have any customers that are doing enterprise employee monitoring, but we know it's happening. We know there are
employees of
Yeah.
the employers. So.
Yeah. That's it depends on what angle you're looking at that. But yeah, we know that there are companies out there doing employee monitoring, certainly.
Okay.
Is there another question? No? Okay. So in these and almost all of the wearable devices on the market today that are doing biometric sensing of some kind, and I'll try to stay out of the way here, most of these, in fact I saw a number the other day that now over 70% of the wearable devices that are coming to market now have PPG sensors in them as the dominant biometric sensor platform. And that's primarily because, well, two reasons. One is the sensor modules can be small enough to get embedded into a wide variety of different devices and different form factors and different use cases. And those use cases are primarily driven by the fact that you can get a broad range of biometrics out of a PPG waveform. So this is a cartoonized version of a PPG waveform. It looks similar to an EKG, and you can obviously get heart rate out of these sensors. And let me just take a step back and do a quick summary of how this technology works. So those green blinking lights or other colored blinking lights are shining light into the body, measuring how much of that light is reflected back based on blood flow. So you can see the different changes in the absorption patterns between when the heart beats, absorbs more light, the capillary bed expands, and when it's not beating, that capillary bed contracts, it absorbs less light. This is a very high level version of how this is working, but effectively that's what you're looking at, is the different absorption patterns in that light reflected back off of the capillary bed. So from that, and just to give you a sense of what the amount of light that is actually reflected off of blood flow on average is less than 1%. So it's literally trying to find a needle in a haystack every second or so, however often you're measuring those metrics. The rest of the light gets scattered either in the tissue or gets corrupted by environmental light or motion noise or a variety of different other challenges that are introduced into when you put this sensor technology into a wearable device that by nature is moving around on the human body. So back to the PPG waveform. Heart rate is kind of table stakes these days for wearable devices, but you can also get what I mentioned earlier, the heart rate variability. That's the RR interval is the interval between the peaks of the waveforms here. That's the time between beats of the heart. That is an input to heart rate variability calculations and also cardiac function like the AFib and arrhythmia detection I talked about earlier. When you look at more of the long form waves, that is an indication around respiration rate and the breathing patterns. You can also see differences in perfusion or how the blood is perfused through the body in whatever location the sensor happens to be located. And then also you can see the amplitude of the waveform has direct attribution around the pulse pressure, which, getting back to your question around blood pressure, this is a key input into estimating blood pressure with these PPG modules. Which,
but it seems hard to do, right? It's been been a holy grail. I think even for you guys for multiple years. So is that? I mean, what are the challenges to try to make this, at least from a reproducibility point, maybe not an accuracy point, a trackable metric?
Yeah. So it's been a huge challenge, something we've been working on, and we and many others have been working on for years. And we now have that technology working, and we'll commercialize that later this year. And when we say commercialize, we mean make it available for the device makers to embed in whatever products they're looking at building. So this is something you'll see come to market later next year, probably at the earliest. But you'll see more announcements about that later this year. But it will be clinically validated and meeting the ISO standards for accuracy.
Question, does it need to be calibrated before use?
So we have two models. There's a calibrated model and an uncalibrated model. We'll launch both of those. The calibrated model, we think, the data we've seen on north of 1,000 patients, north of 10,000 data sets, needs to be calibrated about every 4 or 5 weeks. We think it could be longer, but minimum 4 or 5 weeks. The uncalibrated version, we need some metadata about the individual, but that obviously requires no calibration.
Is this technology similar to Loop? I know Loop probably has some sort of something similar, light-based arterial blood pressure measurement.
So I'm not familiar with their technology, so I can't speak to that. What we have developed is purely PPG-based technology. There's no ECG, no pulse transit time. It's purely based on the PPG waveform, and so yeah, there's different technologies and different sensor modalities out there that are measuring blood pressure at different levels of accuracy. But and I should say, since we're on the topic of blood pressure, we have that working at the fingertip or in the ear, one or the other. No need for both, but that's.
Since you mentioned the different modalities, have you explored perhaps arterial tonometry? I think that's sort of some area that people are using to perhaps gauge the blood pressure.
So we're looking at a variety of different sensor modalities, but I can't remember who I was talking to about this earlier, but we see that a lot of runway left in the PPG waveform itself, and so the vast majority of our R&D is focused on getting more advanced metrics out of the PPG waveform in and of itself.
So this sensor is for the implant device or?
No.
For,
I guess you could implant it if you wanted to, but it is designed to work.
yeah, how does it measure, like, you see the blood flow, like
Yeah.
the white reflection?
It's reading blood flow off of the capillary bed, just under the skin.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Have you seen the Omron watch?
Yes.
Is that good enough?
It depends on your definition of good enough. It is a great device, and it's still using the pressure just at the wrist as opposed to on the band itself. Correct. Yeah, and you've got to hold it up
For accuracy.
at the heart level. And be at rest, and all of the other things that you would normally need to do when measuring your blood pressure with a cuff. Yeah, so this is what we're launching later this year is a blood pressure measurement at rest. So, but we see a path to getting to continuous blood pressure measurement even during motion. But that's going to be years down the road. But there's a path to get there. A lot of what we have focused our R&D on over the last few years, well, going back to really the very beginning, is making these PPG sensors motion tolerant through a variety of different hardware and optomechanical innovations, as well as the firmware and the algorithms that are processing the data. So we see those innovations applying to the blood pressure technology as well. It's just going to require more time and resources.
So where is the most popular place you put this kind of sensor on people's body?
So it's about half and half on the ear or on the arm somewhere. People like to wear things on their wrist, but actually this is probably a good transition. Not all body locations are created equal for measuring biometrics. I'll get out of the way here. So in general, the head is a great place to measure biometrics with optical sensors like this. And that's mainly because of the physiology of the ear in particular, where you've got a three-dimensional shape and you can maintain stability of the sensor against the skin. There's also just the physiology of the ear is such that it's basically just cartilage and blood vessels, right? So it allows you to get a very clean signal off of the ear, whereas nearly the polar opposite of that is the wrist. People love to wear things on their wrist, but it's an extremely challenging place to measure biometrics optically because of bone, muscle, tendon. There's a lot of local motion, even though I'm not moving. I talk with my hands, so my wrist is moving, and so it presents large challenges with maintaining accuracy at the wrist. So a lot of what we see, a lot of the activity we see is in the ear today, and really actually the first implementation, and I see here, the first implementation of our technology to come to market back in 2012 was an earbud with a heart rate sensor in it. Sorry.
My question for you, so here is an excellent way how to get telemetry. I know that you're also talking about like earbuds and such.
Yeah.
What about the other side of the ear? Like let's say you make smart glasses that are measuring something at the end of your ear.
Yep. So we've done prototyping with that location, and it's okay. Part of what you really need to do, and part of the big question is the device itself and what that form factor looks like, and maintaining stability when the person is taking a measurement taking a biometric measurement. So one of the key aspects to maintaining accuracy with these sensors is good coupling with the skin. The sensors don't have to physically touch the skin, but they need to be very close, and more importantly, they need to maintain a coupling with the skin. So if the skin is moving, the sensor needs to be moving in tandem. So the device needs to be designed in a way where that coupling is maintained. And most of that coupling happens by maintaining contact with the skin. That's why also the ear, you're able to get three-dimensional touch points within the ear to maintain stability of that sensor module in the ear. Yes.
What about the earlobe?
Mhm.
Is that a good place to put it? I would think putting something in your ear affects your hearing, right? So
it does, yeah. So the earlobe is a good place to measure biometrics optically if you're sitting still. There's the earlobe flaps around a lot if you're moving around, and so in hospitals and healthcare facilities, the earlobe clips and the finger clips, those are using PPG sensors. They're just extremely sensitive to motion. So, but you're right that it's something in the ear is generally occluding the ear and impacting how that sound is coming in. And you are seeing more earbuds in particular, and also even over-the-ear headphones that have external microphones that are passing through all of the ambient noise. If you want it to come in, you can obviously change the level of noise coming through. The other element is hearing aids, where the receiver is actually in the ear canal, and that's doing hearing augmentation via the receivers and microphones in those devices as well. I think there was another, yeah.
What is PPG means? Short for?
Oh, it's short for photoplethysmography. Anyone want to spell that?
And that is one thing.
Yeah.
And then, are you measuring the quantity of the light or the quality of the light, like wavelength or something like that? Frequency?
Yeah, so all of the above. Part of it depends on the implementation of the technology, the wavelengths being used, and again, what you're trying to measure. As an example, if you are just looking at heart rate or heart rate variability, if I can go back, whoops, wrong way, then you can do that with either visible light or infrared light. If you want to do one that's not on here, is blood oxygenation. And so that requires multi-wavelengths, typically red and infrared.
Yeah, basically, if you choose the higher frequency, then maybe it won't be absorbed that much as like the light, something like that.
Well, the challenge with the higher frequency is they penetrate deeper into the tissue, and so it's harder to get the reflection off the capillary bed what you want. As it penetrates deeper, it starts scattering even further, and so it's harder to, it makes it that much more difficult to
And
get.
did you choose nose for the location? Because it's fairly like rigid, it is cartilaginous,
Yeah.
and it is very thin, lot of capillaries.
That is true. So I think we found a market of one for a wearable device on the nose. That's the other challenge with, so the forehead's a very good place to measure biometrics optically, but there's, in general, people don't want to wear things for long periods of time on their forehead. Hats, yes. Helmets, yes, but not nearly as wearable or as usable or user-friendly, if you will, as an earbud or certainly as a wristwatch or something else on the arm. I think there was another. Oh, sorry. I think you were next.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Just chest bands or something like that. Number one. Number two, your sampling. What's the battery consumption like? You know.
So it varies by device, but so I'll speak to our sensor technology specifically. When we're in full power, full continuous monitoring mode, that's measuring at least 4 times a second, if not more, then you're looking at about 400 microamps. So depending on the device it's embedded into and the battery capacity, there's a lot of moving parts there, but that's, as far as the sensor technology goes, that's about what you're consuming. So and that's, again, that's in full power mode. There's duty cycling and all kinds of things you can do to.
So most of the energy gets spent on the light emitter or on the compute?
At this point, yeah, the biggest power draw is the LEDs. It used to be the MCU, but there's been advancements in power efficiency in the MCUs recently that's significantly reduced that.
Do you use polarization
5
of any
minutes.
kind to increase your, sorry, you should.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I missed the question, sorry.
Do you use any kind of polarization to improve the fidelity or?
Yeah, so there's, depending on the form factor and the body location, we're doing different filtering techniques to optimize the signal coming in.
So how new is this PPG technology? So why should we?
At least decades, if not longer.
But why should we use your technology rather than other sensors? There are so many sensors. The wearable is nothing new. So why make a big deal about this PPG?
Well, so I think and we think there's a lot more to do with the PPG sensors beyond just measuring heart rate. And in fact, in our view, the technology is heavily underutilized in terms of the capabilities of these sensor modules today. That most of the implementations of the PPG sensors in general are still here measuring heart rate, and that's it. And even though today you can take that same sensor technology and do all of the things you see here and more. And so I think that the real impact is doing more with what's available today in terms of the sensor technology and its capabilities, but then also getting that technology into more devices in more use cases. That's where we see the path going forward. And I know I've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to jump ahead. We haven't even gotten into what's going on in the ear. So I'll just jump through these real quick. So if you believe Gartner's data or IDC's data or any of these industry analysts, hearables, meaning ear-based devices, are expected to be the primary wearable form factor in just a few years, outselling smartwatches and fitness bands and other form factors. So whether none of these numbers are going to be actually right, but we see them as being directionally correct. So a hearable is, as we define it, is an ear-worn device, most of which are either audio earbuds or a hearing augmentation device of some kind, with additional sensor technology to add contextual information to that audio experience, or adding additional functionality like heart rate monitoring or other capabilities there. Yes, sir?
You quickly skim through it and you said, hey, the hearable would be most
yes.
palatable thing. And you agree it's directionally right. Why?
So, great question. So there's never been more reasons to put things in your ears and leave them there. So just a few. Mobile devices, we all carry at least one, if not many of them, and most of those no longer have a headphone jack, and so you need some way to consume all of that content that is available to you on that mobile device. Much of that interaction is being done by voice assistants today in some form or fashion, whether that's streaming video or social media, shifting to video-based content, interactive gaming, telehealth, podcasting, and other audio content is growing dramatically. Remote working, most people who are remote working spend a lot of time on conference calls or communicating with coworkers in some form or fashion that requires a hearing device. The sensor technology obviously has advanced dramatically to be able to do a variety of different things in ear-based devices. And that combined with utilizing that data in machine learning algorithms and applying that that modality to the data that is coming off of these this sensor technology, I can tell you, we without some of the more advanced machine learning capabilities that we've developed over the last few years, we never would have been able to get to the point where we are with measuring blood pressure and other more advanced metrics without machine learning. And then thanks to Apple, the social stigma is gone from wearing Q-tips hanging out of your ears. So,
one other quick reason is hearing is being degraded quickly. So
absolutely,
and these are enhancers that are non-stigma producing enhancers. So.
Yep. And I will, I'll go through this quickly, but to that point exactly, hearables also address two major problems with wearables, kind of this whole notion around death by discharge, if you will, where the novelty of a wearable device wears off as you maybe forget to charge the device and leave it at home, and then ultimately it ends up in the sock drawer. Well, most hearables are, if you leave the house without, well, certainly if you need a hearing aid, if you leave the house without your hearing aids, you're going back to get them. Same thing if you go out for a run, you're very likely not to leave your headphones behind, or if you need a hearing device for work or watching videos, you're very likely to make sure that's with you. The other problem is providing valuable health insights. So back to your point around the growing amount of hearing loss going on. It's not just the growing amount of hearing loss, but there's significant comorbidities associated with that hearing loss that these types of devices can help mitigate, if not help directly solve. So some of the bigger ones, cardiovascular disease. Someone with hearing loss has 3 times higher risk for cardiovascular disease, 3 times higher risk of diabetes, significantly higher risk of depressive symptoms and social isolation. So if you think about this sensor technology coming together, not just from the biometric standpoint, but something like social isolation, just measuring how often someone talks on a daily basis within 24 hours, that has direct implications around someone's level of social interaction, and provides the ability to engage that individual before it becomes too much of a problem. So we could talk about each one of these in detail quite a bit, but I think it's safe to say that and what I find really fascinating is you don't generally hear hearing aids and innovation in the same sentence very often, but there is a tremendous amount of innovation going on in your ear. It's kind of one of the leading edge of innovation in this convergence of consumer wearables and health and medical devices, and we certainly see that as continuing. So with that, a lot of great questions and dialogue so far, but I'm happy to talk further. And this is how to get a hold of me if you want to talk further. Yes.